Welcome back to Yang Daily. I'll be your host, Alex Cheney, bringing you all the Yang news you need to live your life right. This is going to be a special deep dive episode. This topic is really important, and covering it took pretty much all my available time. There also wasn't a lot of other big news for the day. I think it'll make a decent episode to bookmark and reference. Let's dig in. Unite America has a great explanation of the toxic effect our current primary system has on democracy, and I want to convey and expand on it here because it's incredibly important. The headline is this: in the 2020 elections, just 10% of Americans nationwide essentially decided the winners in 83% of congressional seats. Again, that's 10% of voters elected 83% of Congress. How can that be? Well, it's a few things. First, geographic self-sorting and gerrymandering together have made 83% of districts safe or uncompetitive, meaning that either the Democratic or Republican Party, depending on the district, is sure to win the general election and the other doesn't have a realistic chance. Furthermore, of the 361 uncompetitive congressional districts in the 2020 election, 151 of those had no competition even within the party, meaning effectively no voters had a say in the outcome. And lastly, nearly 11 million independent voters were prohibited from participating in either party's primaries altogether. In other words, Americans in only 17% of districts had a real choice between Republican and Democratic candidates. 48% had a choice between candidates of the dominant party, and the remaining 35% of districts had no real choice at all. Ideally, all districts would have competition between independents and more than two parties. Right now, we don't even have competition between two parties in more than 17% of districts. It's appalling. It's important to be aware that polling finds primary voters are far more extreme in their political views than general election voters of the same party, meaning that those 83% of elections where only one party can win are being decided by the most extreme partisan voters. When the most radical voters of a single party decide the election, that selects for rabidly partisan representatives, which leads to partisan gridlock in Congress, extremely dangerous rhetoric, and the rise of fascist, anarchist, nationalist, racist, and other toxic ideologies. The most extreme outliers picking the country's leaders is not how democracy is supposed to work. So, what's the fix? The geographic consolidation of voters is a psychological phenomenon that will likely remain. It's partly why we have countries and states. People like to surround themselves with like-minded individuals and have a government that represents their shared values. The lack of even intra-party competition in 35% of districts, on the other hand, can be mitigated by more people running for office and by making that easier to do via public campaign finance, either locally or federally, to make common Americans a more powerful donor group than special interests. This empowers those candidates who represent the will of the majority, not just meaning that it will be easier for those people to run, but creating better incentives for those currently in power. Ideally, this would be done by giving every American a certain amount of money from the government that they can donate to political parties. The duopoly issue can be mitigated with multi-member districts. Electing multiple representatives in the same district makes it much easier for smaller parties to win a seat. The more seats in a district, the more candidates the big parties have to split their votes between in order to win all the seats. With enough available seats, the duopoly spreads itself so thin that a third party with all their support behind a single candidate can win one of the seats and gain a proportional voice in Congress. Gerrymandering can be mostly fixed legislatively by mandating that district lines be drawn by independent commissions rather than the state legislature, as H.R. 1 and S1 are currently attempting to do, though it can also be done by local bills. Finally, the lack of voting in primaries can be fixed by eliminating primaries altogether via score, approval, or ranked choice voting in the general election. Score and approval voting, unlike plurality voting, allow voters to express their opinion on all of the candidates rather than just one. It eliminates the spoiler effect or the problem of less viable candidates taking votes from more viable candidates. Ranked choice voting does this as well, though somewhat less effectively. Without the spoiler effect, primaries are not needed. Voters can give their preference for every candidate in a single election. Put it all together, and you would have a single election with no need for runoffs, maximal voter turnout, minimal partisanship and extremism, and all voters free to express their preferences honestly. This is key to effective democratic representation. Please fight with me for voting reform, multi-member districts, public campaign finance, and independent districting commissions at all levels of government. This is how we, the people, take control of government. This is how democracy works. And that'll do it for today's Yang Daily. Bookmark and share the thread and episode if you think it makes a good democracy reform review. Flood Congress with calls, tweets, faxes, and letters using the Resist bot or Income Movement's easy contacts below. If you need help, consult Humanity Forward, the Income Movement Aid Database, the Mission Asset Fund, or United Way, and don't forget to Yang Daily.